Hello, awesome people. I hope you're having an amazing day today. Today we're taking a look at J.R.R. Tolkien's translation of Beowulf. He translated it in 1924 after friends found out they desired it for a while, and it was eventually published. And so we have the translation here. After a couple of preludes, the first prelude by his son saying why it took so long, and then the second one dedicated to notes on the script itself. It starts on page 10 and it ends on page 96. I'm sorry, 106. So it's about 96 pages long. So what I did was I read the first two preludes, about 25 pages long, since it starts on the on lettered things like on A, and then it ends like about 15 pages later, and then 10 pages in the second prelude proper. So it's about 25 pages long. I knocked it out. I didn't read like the quotes and so forth that are in the second one. So I knocked it out in about half an hour on a Sunday night after finishing football. And then I did the next 32 pages in about an hour and 10 minutes, Monday night, Tuesday night, and Wednesday night I finished it. So each night I spent about an hour and 10 minutes knocking out about 32 pages. So it was roughly about 3.5 hours to read it, plus a half an hour for the opening stuff. So it's about 4 hours total for me to knock it out. Now, like I said, it ends on page 106. So it has this is a thick book, right? After that are notes on various footnotes. That goes on for pages and pages. And then there is a commentary, and there's even an introduction to the commentary to set the scene. So there's a lot of stuff in this, which I didn't read, and I'm not going to read because I'm not approaching this as a student who's reading this for a class, right? I'm reading this as somebody who's writing for this channel. And J.R.R. Tolkien had a translation of Beowulf. Did you know that, right? And so I'm going to go ahead. I have that for you folks now. So anyway, I read Beowulf when I was in school, once in high school, and then that's it. I've never gone back and read it since. Now, please note that the translation, while the original is obviously free, the translations still have a copyright date. And since this was copyright dated more recently, even though he wrote it in 1924, which was actually before the current copyright in 2023 of 1928, it still would not be applied because it's the copyright date of when it's published, not when it's written. So it's still under copyright, so I can't link you to it for free. So it's been published posthumously by J.R.R. Tolkien. So I'm not this great English scholar. I'm not a scholar of the language that he was an expert in, and he wrote and he taught classes on Beowulf, and I talk about in his classes. They would regularly in the tests for people in order to pass, they would give them excerpts of Beowulf in the original language, and then they had to translate it. So this was an academic test, right? So this is something that he did. He did this very young, before he became a full-time professor, as a passion project, and because it's something that he loved. And then he teaches people about Beowulf as a professor, right? So this is, since he's an expert in the language that this was originally written in, right? So you can definitely see why fans would want this as soon as they realized that this existed, right? But Christopher Tolkien, he'll defend why it took him some while for him to publish it out there for folks. So again, I'm not this expert. I'm not taking classes on it. I'm not an expert in the language as it is originally, right, or so forth. So I certainly can't speak about this as somebody who's an expert, right? And again, my reviews are spoiler-free, although I'm sure most people know Beowulf and have read it as a kid, just like I did, or are familiar with the plot points if they haven't. But basically, so again, I keep my reviews spoiler-free, and we'll do so here again for you folks. It's harder to read. It's not like the English hasn't been like modernized, like it uses like things like old English, like old English versions of this ways of saying things, like thee and thou and things like that, right? Right, and similar to like King James English. So he didn't modernize it to 1924's speaking. So it's a little bit harder to read, and it's And this thing is a big size, oversized chunk. So again, it took me like a lot longer to knock out 30 pages than it would normally, and for me to knock out 30 pages in like a novel, right? Both because of the density of the language, and so it's harder to read, and then secondly because of the oversized length of things. I'll link you to this in the collection in the comments below with the commentary and so forth in case you're interested in checking it out. So how can I really sort of review something that's been reviewed heavily, right? It's because I don't have I don't have a special or unique criteria. So I'm giving it, it's a classic for a reason. It's an 8. John Carpenter found this to be, Michael rather found this to be pretty boring, and he wrote a version of this that's fancier called Eaters of the Dead that he published. That the movie The 13th Warrior is based on. So if you want to go check out Michael Crichton's Eaters of the Dead, you can, because he was bored by this. But I'm giving it an 8 because it's a classic, and it's so certainly fun stuff and some nice fun phrases and so forth. But it can be a little speechy at times. Like somebody will just talk about like something that they did in the past, or get people caught up with what's happened since the last consecutive skipped ahead in time, or talk about childhood events, those sorts of things. And so I hear, right, and it's not a 10 out of 10 like some people probably would want to think. It can be a little speechy at times, but it's fun. And put it in its proper context, that was probably really common for that time too. So basically what's happening is it's set in Denmark, and there is this kingdom has come under assault by this nasty monster named Grendel, and then Beowulf arrives as our young hero, and he's going to take out Grendel, not with the strength of steel, but with the strength of bone and muscle and flesh, and wrestle him and so forth. So that's what he is pledges to do. That's about 10 or 15 pages in after he's arrived, and he talks about that. So we'll see how that goes for him. So there you go. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. And then there's basically 3 separate acts, if you will. And that's Act 1 against Grendel, Act 2 against Grendel's something, which I won't tell you in order to spoil it, and then Act 3 against something else years in the future against another monster. So there are sort of 3 separate things that have to be defeated, and each of them take about 30-40 pages each to knock it out and to introduce it. The last one's about a lot. It's introduced and defeated in like 10 pages, and then the last 20 pages about what happens afterwards. So anyway, I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Have you read Beowulf by specifically as translated by Tolkien? If so, what did you think about it? Would you like to talk about it in the comments below? Let's do so. If you enjoyed this video, why not hit that subscribe button? There's going to be a lot more of these to follow. And then finally, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and investing it and watching my video. We all have so many things happening in our lives. We're pulled in so many different directions. So the fact that you spent this time with me is incredibly humbling, and I appreciate it. And next is J.R.R. Tolkien's Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, a translation which I've never read before. Not just his translation, but I've never read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight. So that'll actually be fun, because I won't be comparing it distantly to something I read decades ago, but won't be remembered that well. This time I just won't be comparing it to anything. It'll just be a brand new story to me. So that's next. All right, folks. Once again, the channel is named after the worst thing about new books, a quote by a French philosopher named J.R.R, who said that the worst thing about new books was that they kept us from reading the old ones. So a 1924 published, or translated and then published more recently, is definitely something that's on the older side of life. So that's definitely where I get my sort of beats to move forward and my passion from. So there you are. I'll go ahead and leave you to it. Once again, thanks for watching, and have a great day.